In the Souls games, magic and spells have always been considered the overpowered strategy. While true that at the beginning magic was extremely powerful, as the following games were released, magic continued to lose strength in a strict damage consideration. In other words, magic has continued a process of balance. In Elden Ring, this sense of balance has completely changed. Magic is truly powerful, not just in damage, but also in utility. In my opinion, the best way to run a magic build is to combine all of its different options in order to have a solution for every situation that the game can throw at you. I believe that if you're just hanging back, slinging spells, you're doing it wrong. To remedy this, I present to you the Dark Moon Sage. This is a pure intelligence build created as a Battlemage or Gish type character. With this build, you should never be afraid of battle. With this build, you should always move in for the kill. As always, we will review the stats of this build, the equipment that we use, and of course, its applications within the game. Since there is a lot of ground to cover, I have created timestamps in the description of this video in order to make it easier to navigate the content and give you the opportunity to skip straight to the part that interests you the most. Let's get started. This is a PvE focused build that wants to give the player as many different damage dealing options as possible in order to be able to come out victorious out of every battle encounter that the game will throw at you. We want high damage, high versatility, and of course, high utility and survivability. This is not a glass cannon build. We want to deal the damage without running the risk of being one-shotted. This is not the type of build that forces you to follow specific steps in the right order to be able to deal damage. Not at all. This build gives you true strength and the power to use it in many different ways and in many different situations. With this character, we aim to maximize our efficiency by increasing our power and lowering our risk. With this setup, the build is not in charge of telling you how to play. You make that decision. To reach this objective, we will be running the following stats. Start the game as an astrologer. This class is the most efficient to reach the required stat block for this build, allowing us to make use of every single rune level possible to its maximum potential. As the primary focus of this build is PvE, I have chosen to base it on rune level 150. Finally, this is the stats block that you want to end up with. 60 Vigor, 32 Mind, 13 Endurance, 16 Strength, 12 Dexterity, 80 Intelligence, 7 Faith, and 9 Arcane. There are many ways to reach these stats. Level up however you feel comfortable. That said, I do recommend that you take the following path. As soon as you are in the lands between, the first thing to do is get your Vigor to 20. Survivability is more important than damage when you are just starting out a character. The second priority is to get Strength to 16 and Endurance to 13. These will cover the requirements that you need to use the weapons and armor that we want. The Lordsworn's Greatsword or the Halberd are good examples of early game weapons that this build can use. With your health in good standing and your early game weapon figured out, the third priority will be to bring Intelligence to 30. This will provide a good boost to your magical damage and will increase the range of spells that you can use. Your fourth priority is Mind to 25. Most of our damage will come through frequent Ash of War and spell usage, so the extra Mind will provide a good increase to our sustained damage. The fifth priority is Vigor to 40. With this amount, we can survive the mid-game sections comfortably, increasing the sustainability and consistency of the character. The sixth priority is Intelligence to 60. At this time, we are already past the first soft cap of the skill. Our damage will be considerably high and we will be able to use most of the spells in the game. The seventh priority is to get Vigor to 60. This is the final soft cap of the skill and it will allow us to survive the end game comfortably. For your eighth priority, bring Mind to 32. Now we will have a very healthy FP pool that will serve us well in order to increase our damage through more frequent use of Ashes of War and spells. Finally, we finish up intelligence at 80, reaching the next soft cap of the skill in order to obtain the most scaling possible with our weapons, spells, and Ashes of War. So, why do we use these final stats? Allow me to explain. Vigor at 60 because I believe it is the perfect amount of health to survive the hardest hitting attacks of PvE. This will give us the total of 1900 base HP. It is the second cap for the stat. Going any higher really diminishes your returns, and honestly, I would never go any lower. Mind at 32 because a lot of our damage consists on Ashes of War and offensive sorceries. This means that the more mind we have, the more damage that we can deal. After I had all the other stats min-maxed, every single remaining point went into this skill. Endurance at 13 because it is exactly the amount that I need to be able to use my favorite weapons and armor while maintaining a medium load. This has been perfectly min-maxed to the last decimal. Any lower and you lose the build, any higher and you are wasting points. Strength at 16 because it is the amount that we require to use our preferred weapon of choice for this build, the Darkmoon Greatsword. Dexterity at 12 because it is the base level of the astrologer and it is already enough to use the weapons that this build requires. There is no need to level it any further. Intelligence at 80 because it is the most important stat of this build. Our weapon damage as well as our sorcery damage depend on this stat. This is the second soft cap of the skill and it provides us with a large amount of scaling to all our damage sources. Going higher than 80 is generally not recommended, as the returns we get for these final levels is not worth the investment that we need to make. Faith at 7 because it is the base level of the astrologer. We do not increase it at all in this build. Finally, Arcane at 9 because it is the base level of the astrologer. We do not increase it at all in this build. Moving on to the equipment, this is the basic layout of the build. Starting with the main hand, I am using the Darkmoon Greatsword plus 10 alongside a Magic Misericord plus 25. An absolute staple to the series, the Darkmoon Greatsword is a sword that goes by many names. The Moonlight Greatsword, the Large Sword of Moonlight, or any other name that you prefer, this is the go-to weapon for intelligence builds. While it can be argued that it is not the best, it is, in my opinion, definitely the coolest one. Providing us with very solid AR, the capability of inflicting the Frost status effect, and a very comfortable intelligence scaling, this Greatsword is an all-around versatile weapon. Most of its moveset is shared with standard Greatswords, and this is good, but the secret to this weapon comes from its R2s. Normally, they look awkward and not very special, but once the weapon's Ash of War is active, the R2s will fire a wave of frost energy from each swing. This ability is active throughout the whole duration of the Ash of War, and it makes up the bulk of the weapon's offensive power. Seeing as how they are standard R2s, they also deal great stability damage, meaning that we can break an enemy's stance from range. This weapon is both beautiful and effective, and it is the main focus of the build as we try to increase the damage of these energy waves as much as possible. The Magic Misericord plus 25 provides this build with great burst damage. Whenever you are sneaking up on an enemy or getting a critical hit after a stance break, soft swap to this monster for incredible critical damage. I use the magic affinity on it because it has generally provided me with the most damage possible, so keep bringing it out on each critical hit and you will notice the difference. As for its Ash of War, I use Bloodhound Step. Generally speaking, I do not use this Ash in battle. That said, it is very useful to make a quick escape in a moment of trouble, to dodge any particularly deadly attacks, and to traverse difficult terrain like lava or rot lakes. All in all, it is an extremely useful support tool for PvE, and it would be foolish to not have it in your back pocket. On another note, this weapon works perfectly with the Darkmoon Greatsword's capability of breaking stances from range. It is possible to break the stance of an enemy with the Greatsword's special R2s, switch to the Misericord, and Bloodhound Step in for the finishing blow. This combination gives us the opportunity of dealing damage from a distance and only moving in when it is absolutely safe. In the offhand, I run the Carian Regal Scepter plus 10. This staff provides us with the highest sorcery scaling without any additional conditions. While it is true that Lusat's staff provides us with more damage, the increased FP cost is, in my opinion, not worth it. To put it into perspective, Lusat's staff will increase our damage by about 10 to 11%, but it will also increase our FP consumption by 50%. I do not think that this is worth it. The Carian Regal Scepter is also a bit lighter at only 3 units of weight, making it more efficient when it comes to allocating skill points. Let's not forget that it also boosts the power of moon sorceries. There are only 2 in the game and we only use one of them, but this increase in damage is nice to have in any case. On another note, this staff has a beautiful aesthetic and fits the theme of the build very well. All in all, it is a very balanced option that provides many strengths with almost no weaknesses. With our weapons out of the way, let's talk about Talismans. This build is a Gish type, meaning that our main objective is to combine both melee and sorcery options. That said, we are not interested in being a glass cannon. For this reason, we also want to increase our HP in order to avoid being 1 or 2-shotted by the strongest enemies in the game. As such, the first 2 talismans that we will use are the Erdtree's Flavor +2 and the Crimson Amber Medallion +2, in order to maximize our HP pool and have some additional equip load to play with. The other 2 talismans will be focusing on damage. Shard of Alexander and Godfrey Icon will both provide a large boost of damage to the Dark Moon Greatsword's R2s once we activate its Ash of War. Also, Godfrey Icon will increase the damage that our charged sorceries will do. We run a few of those, so it is a welcome boost to our damage. This is the standard talisman setup, and it will leave us with a total of 2,134 HP, about 20% physical damage absorption, an additional 15% damage to our charged sorceries, and of course, about 30 to 32% additional damage on the charged R2s of the Dark Moon Greatsword. Now, while this is the basic setup, it is not the only one that we can use. For those players that prefer a bit more defense, you can switch out the Shard of Alexander for the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman to increase our physical damage absorption. The result of this change will be a total of 2,134 HP, about 36% physical damage absorption, an additional 15% damage on our charged spells, and an additional 15% damage on the charged R2s of the Dark Moon Greatsword. With this setup, we lose some damage in exchange for a serious upgrade to defense. On the other hand, if you, my dear viewer, are the type of player that wants to go all in on damage and not care about defense, then you can use this next setup. From the original setup, we would switch out the Crimson Amber Medallion +2 for the Magic Scorpion Charm. In this way, we would combine the power of the Shard of Alexander, the Godfrey Icon, and the Magic Scorpion Charm to reach incredible damage numbers. That said, please listen to this warning. Using this setup will leave you vulnerable to a possible 1 or 2 shot from some enemies. All in all, it leaves you with a total of 1,976 HP, an additional 28% damage on our charged spells, an additional 48% damage on the charged R2s of the Dark Moon Greatsword, and a measly 12% base physical damage absorption. This setup gives up a lot of survivability in exchange for a lot more damage. This is the Glass Cannon setup. If you choose to go down this path, please be very careful. Alright, let's talk about armor. In this game, armor is extremely important. This is because this game has extremely good looking armor. Fashion Souls, or Elden Bling, however you prefer to call it, is at an all-time high. For this build, I wanted to maintain the standard roved look of a spellcaster, but add some details of armor to represent the character's willingness to charge straight into battle. This look is achieved with the Altered Eccentric's hood, the Astrologer's robe, and the Redmane Knight greaves with the Redmane Knight gauntlets. In this case, the combination of the Altered Eccentric's hood and the astrologer robes make it so that the robe's hood is raised over the mask of the eccentric's alteration. I felt that this was a perfect fit for the build, especially taking into consideration the glorious beard that the helmet comes with. Nevertheless, my dear viewer, please remember that armor choice is personal, and do not forget to use whatever you prefer. You can try to wear lighter armor to save some points from endurance, or you might try to use one of the many headpieces that give you skill or damage bonuses. All of these are good choices. In any case, this armor setup leaves you with a base 20% physical damage absorption and a total of 23 poise. We can change these values based on the talisman setups that we already reviewed, but generally speaking, they are enough to use in PvE. On the other hand, when it comes to PvP, this is not a good armor setup. I definitely went for looks over stats in this case. Next up, I want to go over the consumable items and the summon that I prefer to use with this build in order to support it and increase its strength. In regards to consumables, I only really use one, and that is sleep pots. Generally, my spells give me access to easy frost procs, so sleep is the only effect that I need support with. The value of these pots cannot be overstated. It controls groups of enemies, it hinders the larger problems, and of course, it makes some bosses extremely easy. Even if I don't use them all the time, I always feel better with a few of these in my pocket. As for the summon, we are running the Mimic plus 10. It is my opinion that the Mimic is the best summon in the game, even after the nerfs it received. Being able to slap an almost exact copy of your build onto the playing field is just too much value. Not only is it another target for the enemies to focus on, it is also a monster when it comes to dealing damage. The Mimic is capable of jumping into the fray with the Dark Moon Greatsword. It is also capable of pelting enemies with spells from behind you, and it will even drop a Terra Magica here and there for you, which will increase your magical damage free of charge. A true bringer of both offensive and defensive support. That said, since we are running such a large amount of options between our weapon and our spells, the Mimic will sometimes not make the most efficient choices. The AI of the summon will sometimes make questionable decisions, like for example using magic damage on a magic resistant enemy. Or, my absolute worst nightmare, it will start to twirl the sorcery staff at enemies instead of using its actual weapon. It is admittedly not a perfect companion, but its pros definitely outweigh its cons. I believe it is the best option. Up to this point, we have spoken about the equipment and the armor. We have talked about offense and defense. Up next, we need to talk about the different spells that I use in order to get the best value from this build. Now, before we begin, it is important that you, my dear viewer, understand that spell choice is 100% personal. The list of spells that I will show you here is not the absolute best list that you can have. Instead, these are the spells that I prefer to use because they are the ones that suit my own playstyle the most. You may think that other spells are better, or you may think that I am making the wrong choices. This is okay. Please remember to use any spell that you think is best, or that provides the most fun for you. I will show you my list of spells, and do my best to explain the reason why I think they are the most useful. Hopefully, you are able to obtain inspirations for when you are making your own list. Let's take a look. In this build, we use all 10 of our memory slots in order to maximize the amount of spells that we can have attuned. As mentioned before, the objective is to have a list that would allow us to be prepared for the many situations that the game can present us. Each spell has a use, and they each shine as an answer to a specific problem. The list of spells that I like to use is as follows: Night Comet, Carian Greatsword, Ranni's Dark Moon, Rock Sling, Loretta's Greatbow, Comet Azur, and Terra Magica. Night Comet is the first spell in my list, and it serves the purpose of a generalized ranged option. If I need to hit something that is at mid-range, this is my go-to spell. Night Comet has a series of characteristics that are key to its inclusion in my list of spells. First of all, it can be charged when casted. This means that at the cost of additional cast time, we can increase the spell's potency. Thanks to the Godfrey icon in this build, we will get an additional boost of damage when we do so. Second, Night Comet shares the characteristics that all Comet spells have. They pierce enemies. This means that it can also serve as a good tool for crowd control and multi-target elimination, as long as the enemies are readily positioned in a line formation. All of this gives the spell fantastic versatility and ease of use. Finally, this spell is a night sorcery, giving it a specific advantage against bosses and NPC invaders. These enemies will not react to the casting of the spell, and as a result, will not attempt to dodge it, increasing the success rate of each casting against these kinds of opponents. All in all, it is a very useful spell. Carian Greatsword is my go-to spell when I am in need of some serious crowd control. It has the unique purpose of close-ranged, multi-target elimination. It is a very efficient tool for this thanks to its cheap FP cost in combination with its more than decent damage. Furthermore, we can chain cast this spell back to back to back, meaning that as long as we have FP, our offense will not stop. Granted, this is not a spell that I use frequently. That said, it has never let me down when I called upon it for assistance. Now, I am sure that you're asking why I do not use a Dula's Moonblade instead. This is a good question. The answer is that I actually do use it when the occasion calls for it. That said, a Dula's Moonblade is much more expensive in terms of FP cost, and its damage really depends on the success of both the blade and the frost projectile hitting. This lowers its damage consistency. Of course, it is a great source of frost proc, which definitely provides a large burst of damage. In the end, I believe that these two spells are interchangeable. Nevertheless, the much lower FP cost of Carian Greatsword really drew me towards it, as I can get that many more castings in to successfully crowd control an area. Ranni's Dark Moon is my go-to spell when I need to deal with a high priority single target. This could be a boss or a particularly dangerous enemy. While this spell has a considerable cast time and high FP cost, the advantage that it gives us are too valuable to pass up. When it comes to single target elimination, this is the best spell in our list. The reason for this is actually twofold. First, it is an incredible source of frost proc. If this spell does not outright proc frost on the target with a single casting, it would only take a few more swings of the Dark Moon Greatsword to get there. Furthermore, this spell has a passive effect that lowers the enemy's defenses to magic damage on hit. Taking into consideration that magic is our main source of damage, Ranni's Dark Moon will instantly increase our DPS considerably. For this reason, it is perfect to use this spell in combination with the Dark Moon Greatsword's Ash of War. First, you hit an enemy with this spell, and second, you take advantage of the lower magic resistance in order to get higher damage from the weapon's charged R2s. It is a perfect combination that will allow us to deal large amounts of damage to a single target while maintaining a good FP cost investment. Rock Sling is probably the least used spell in this list. That being said, it is one of the most important ones, if not the most important one. This is for one reason and one reason only. Rock Sling deals physical type damage. This is the only spell in our list that deals this kind of damage. Every other spell deals magic type damage. I am sure you understand that if we face an enemy that has high magic resistance, we would be in trouble. Fortunately, Rock Sling is there to remedy this problem. I only use this spell when I face enemies with such high magic resistance, and even though it is not often, I am always happy to have this one in my back pocket. Furthermore, Rock Sling is also a great source of stability damage, which means that it is capable of very easily breaking an enemy's stance. If you know that you're fighting an enemy that can be stance broken with ease, it is a good idea to use this spell and then go in for the kill with Misericord. I will say this again, I may not use this spell a lot, but it is a staple in my list. Loretta's Greatbow is the spell with the largest range in this list. This is our sniping option, offering long-range single-target elimination. This spell is another one of those that I do not use often, but am always glad to have it ready when the right circumstances occur. Capable of being charged in order to increase its damage, we see it synergize with the Godfrey icon in our build. As a result, we get a spell that provides us high burst damage potential at the longest of ranges. If you are able to get the jump on the enemy, you will have time to use 2 or 3 of these back to back in order to guarantee the kill. It is the number one tool for the stealthy mage, and for good reason. Of course, I am sure that you are asking why I do not use Loretta's Mastery instead. Once again, this is a good question, and the answer is twofold. First and foremost, Loretta's Mastery is much more costly when it comes to FP. Taking into consideration the damage that each spell does in relation to how much FP they cost, the basic Loretta's Greatbow might do less damage per cast, but it is definitely much more efficient at damage to FP ratio. Furthermore, the true damage potential of Loretta's Mastery is only unlocked when all 4 of its projectiles hit their mark. Unfortunately, I have found that this is much easier said than done, as there have been multiple situations in which 1 or even 2 of the projectiles are lost because they hit the floor or some other obstacle. If this happens, then Loretta's Mastery loses a lot of damage potential, and it becomes even more inefficient when we think about its FP cost. For this reason, I prefer Loretta's Greatbow, a simple, single projectile burst damage spell that costs a lot less FP. Being the strongest set-piece spell in our list, Comet Azur is capable of dealing so much damage that it can single-handedly defeat most bosses with just a single casting. Of course, as mentioned already, this requires a setup and very specific conditions. By increasing its damage through multiple sources like Talismans, Terra Magica, and of course the Flask of Physicks, we are able to generate a stream of unstoppable damage. I am sure that you also know that we can combine this spell with another set piece from the Flask of Physicks in order to temporarily remove all FP costs from our spells. This generates a long-lasting, consistent stream of damage until the effect runs out. Of course, you will need the enemy to be within range of the spell, and of course, you will need the enemy to not move at all. This makes it so that there are just a few situations where this spell shines, but when you find yourself in these situations, there is absolutely nothing that the enemy can do to stop you. We can all agree that getting all of these conditions in line can be difficult, and that makes this spell very situational. That said, we cannot ignore its sheer destructive power. I always keep this spell in my list because it completely trivializes a few bosses. Easily one of my favorite spells in the game, and in my opinion, one of the most useful ones in this list, Terra Magica provides a steady 35% magic damage increase to all sources that originate from its area of effect. Since we have many sources of damage that are effective from range, and they are all magical damage, Terra Magica provides an incredible boost to most of our tools. The best part is that it does not only apply to spells, but to all sources of magic damage. This means that for a simple 20 FP, you can increase the strength of Dark Moon Greatsword's R2s by 35% on top of all of the other boosts that you can stack on it. Of course, this has the single weakness that you must stay within the area of effect. At first, this might sound like too much of a hassle to be effective, but it is actually quite easy to set up. Comet Azur and Loretta's Greatbow are great spells to combine with Terra Magica, as they are long range and will always have you surprising the enemy. Let's not forget about Ranni's Dark Moon, another big damage spell that will take advantage of this boost. It is an extremely useful power-up for almost every single source of damage in this build, and I personally love to set it down as much as possible. I am sure that by now you have noticed that nowhere in this build do I use talismans, equipment, or skills to increase the base casting speed of my sorceries. And this is true. In this build, I make no efforts to increase the casting speed of my character, and honestly, I believe that in this build it is completely unnecessary. You may agree or disagree, and that's okay. But the fact of the matter remains that the difference between base casting speed and max casting speed is not a lot to be considered. When we take into consideration this build type and the fact that we spend a lot of time in melee range, on top of the fact that our main source of damage is the Dark Moon Greatsword's charged R2s, you will quickly realize that we can have a lot more value investing into more damage over more casting speed. On your screen, I have been showing you the difference in casting speed between a character with base speed and a character with maximum speed. When shown side to side, you can see the difference. That said, the difference is so minuscule that it is only a valid consideration in situations when you are chain casting the same spell multiple times. In this case, you will be able to get 1 or 2 extra castings eventually. But for this build, which only casts spells when required and in controlled bursts, this advantage quickly vanishes. All in all, casting speed is important when your objective is to constantly sling spells at every turn. Since we do not do that with this build, I have decided to focus on power instead. Please, do not think that I am trying to tell you how to play. If you believe that increasing your casting speed is worth the investment, then please do so. Personally, I prefer to increase my damage per cast rather than my total damage over time. The last 2 things I want to focus on are the Flask of Physicks and the Rune of the Demigod. In this build, both of these factors are extremely important, especially for solo play. Allow me to begin with the Flask of Physicks. For this build, I recommend that in your flask you combine the Magic Shrouding Cracked tier and the Cerulean Hidden tier. This combination will give you 2 effects. First of all of our magic type damage will be increased by 20% for the duration of 3 minutes. This affects damage from all sources, including the charged R2s from the Dark Moon Greatsword. And the second effect is that for a short duration, 15 seconds to be exact, all FP consumption is reduced to 0. This means that spells, spirit summons, consumables, ashes of war, anything that consumes FP, you will be able to use free of charge. I am sure that you can very quickly see the benefits of this combination. Not only is our damage increased by a considerable amount, but we are also able to continuously cast our spells without any cost whatsoever. This is particularly useful with the Comet Azur spell, which allows us to set up a constant and ongoing stream of damage for a full 15 seconds. This combination will absolutely trivialize some select bosses. On the other hand, when it comes to the runes of the demigods, I fully recommend that you use Radahn's rune. When activated, this particular rune will increase our HP, FP, and stamina each by a total of 15%. This is perfect for the build because it increases both our offensive power through additional FP to cast more spells and our defensive power by increasing our maximum HP, allowing us to survive stronger hits. With this rune, this build will have a total of 2,454 HP, 211 FP, and 127 stamina. Capable of both dealing large amounts of damage and surviving more than a few blows, this rune completes our Battlemage and readies it for battle. I am not the type of player that likes to stay back, far away from the enemy, slinging spells. I need to be closer to the action. This build allows me to take full advantage of the power of sorceries while keeping a high-paced playstyle that also relies on a good old greatsword. Generally speaking, I was never a fan of magic in Souls games. They were either too strong or too weak for my taste. That being said, Elden Ring provides an extremely fleshed out magic system that appears to have struck a good balance among the other tools that the game offers you. If you're looking for a caster build that can dish out large amounts of damage, but is also able to take a few hits, this build is for you. If you're looking for a build that can combine spellcasting with swordplay and switch between both of these seamlessly, this build is definitely for you. And of course, if you're looking for a build that can give you answers to all of the problems that Elden Ring will throw your way, then this build is a must play for you. I have to say, this build has left me pleasantly surprised. It was extremely fun to play, and I am happy to say that I will be coming back to it in the near future. I hope that it serves you as much as it has served me. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I get to see you on the next one.